You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Well, it's been 11 years. I'm on my 12th year of this podcast now. And if I have taught you anything, if I have drummed something over and over into your heads, it is street smart. All right. Books are great. Books give you basic knowledge, but street smart is that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's when you make it or break it. And now somebody has written a book. Actually, two brothers have written a book, John and Rock Positano. It's really compelling read. The full title of the book, which I really like, is Street Smart, the Primer for Success in the New World. And I might add my own little editorial tag on there, The New Economy, because this economy, you guys are about the same age as I am. This economy is not the economy that any of us grew up in. Rocky, you became a distinguished MD, and you basically don't need to be writing books at this point in your life. How did you two come up with this idea? And I should mention your prior book was Dinner with DiMaggio, and an interesting read. So how did this book come about after that one?
Well, you know what, John, first of all, the nice thing, Kerry, is that John and I grew up in a very interesting environment. We grew up in what we call the old Brooklyn, which was the Brooklyn before the Brooklyn that's cool right now, where everybody wants to live there, but when we were growing up, we were afraid to say where we were from. They'd say, well, where are you guys from? And we'd say under our breaths, Brooklyn. Now it's like, oh my God, like Brooklyn's the place to be. But one of the things that John and I noticed in the last 10 to 15 years, because we deal with a lot of people from our old neighborhood, is that the neighborhood has changed. And we've noticed that the real street smart that we grew up with, is it's more difficult to find these days. And we were concerned, considering what's happened with the pandemic and the fact that, as you had mentioned, the financial industries have changed. We wanted to be able to sort of write a primer and get the assistance of some other very successful people and talk about how we grew up and how some of the things that we grew up with, we can maybe share with today's up-and-coming youth, up-and-coming professionals, et cetera. So that was the reason why John and I wanted to do this, because we felt that this was an important part of the education, because, as we had alluded to earlier, is that, Horatio Alger days are over. Horatio Alger, the days of just working hard and that's going to guarantee your success. Well, guess what? It's no longer there. We know that, So I'll flip over to Johnny, because Johnny could further elucidate on that.
Basically, we think of the book as a guide to spotting, seizing, and exploiting a lucky break. Everyone has this skill. There's no one living today who doesn't have it. This is the readers of this book. These are the people who watch you. Everyone has it. There's no way out. The problem is, and which is critical, the problem is most people do not use it. There's other things going on. They have an analytical mind. They don't have a guts type mind, looking at something and figuring out, actually, this is a wonderful thing to get involved with. Too many blocks are involved. The outside world blocks you. Folks in your own family block you. Certainly friends will block you. People with whom you work will certainly be out to block you. Everyone knows that in their lifetime they had a lucky break, but not everyone sees that break. And I think most folks spot it, but they don't seize it. And that's just where the book is. You have famous folks who are known to be able to spot and seize a lucky break and to follow up. And there's quite a few of them here. And the oddball thing is they all pretty much come from places where you have folks who are not totally like you, who are different races, different faiths, different ethnic levels. And the amazing thing is every one of the folks who we have in this book basically said the same thing. They basically said, this is a skill we all have and which they themselves used. And they used it and they seized their lucky breaks as well as spotted them. And that's why they're where they are now, doing very well.
So, right, my business partner would call this an opportunity mindset. All right.
Absolutely.
And some of the biggest adversities that you come up against in life are actually the biggest opportunities, but they're disguised. So the opportunity comes, but you don't necessarily know that it's an opportunity until afterwards. It's like Steve Jobs' famous commencement speech at Stanford University. And he said, life doesn't make sense when you're living it, but when you look back and you connect the dots, it all makes sense. And he talked about how he took calligraphy. He was a drop-in at Reed College. He took calligraphy and never knowing it was going to be any use. And then when he created the Lisa computer, it was all about fonts and calligraphy. And that experience was invaluable. So, Rocky, what was your biggest break? Did you know it was a break when you saw it? And did you grab it?
Well, Kerry, that's a good question. I think, my mindset has always been a little different. I do believe in the importance of recognizing, obviously, a potential break, but I'm actually from the other mindset. I like to create my own break, which means I like to look at a need and be able to fill that need. And I think the importance of networking, personal networking, not being afraid to get your hands dirty, not necessarily being compensated basically for the things that you're doing are all part of the experience or the external experience that we find a lot of times when we're in the real world. So I think in that respect, I learned at an early age that it's very important to look at people who are successful, okay, and be able to see the things that they do that would enable them to get on that right type of a track. So in that respect, I think that was so important. The ability to grab that break. So, my first break started when I was 16 years old, interestingly. We had a cousin who was a homicide bureau chief in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. And he had said to me, you know what, Rock, it may not be a bad idea. Have you ever seen an autopsy? Now, of course, an autopsy, you think about an autopsy, like, what is that, right?
This sounds like a scene from Quincy here.
Well, exactly. Well, it was. And he says, well, I happen to know the present chief medical examiner pretty well because we do a lot of work with the OCME, Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And he said, let me introduce you. So I'll never forget this, Kerry. I went to the chief medical examiner's office on 30th Street and First Avenue.
I know exactly, right by NYU.
Right by NYU.
There, sure.
And I went in there and I couldn't believe it. I was 16 years old and I'm speaking with the chief medical examiner.
Michael Bodden?
No, actually, DeMeo, Dom DeMeo, who was right before Mike Bodden.
Okay.
And I'll never forget this. I just said, you know what, this is the way to do it. And I said, look, Dr. DeMeo, I know I'm only 16, 17. I'm not looking for money. I just want to come here and get the experience. I mean, and I said at that point, my first time I've ever said this, I said, if anything, I said, I should be paying you, not the OCME paying me. So I think what I did, Kerry, I took that mindset and said, look, sometimes you have to do things on the arm to be able to get somewhere because, a lot of people won't necessarily give you that experience. But yeah. I see as a real problem. I look at some of these kids today is that they won't do anything unless you pay them. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with getting paid, but if you have the opportunity to get experience by some of the best brains in the world, then by all means, what you should do is take advantage of it. So that was the beginning of my learning how to sort of make my own break. And again, after I got into the medical examiner's office, I started to see ways that I could seize my break. And of course, what happened, you had mentioned Mike Bodden, who I'm still in touch with, by the way, all these years later. Yeah. And I'll never forget this. One of the things I learned that Mike Bodden loved about me was that, here I am now 17 or 18. I knew all the stuff that was going on inside that office. Yeah, one thing Mike loved, he says, one thing, Rocky, I could always say something in front of you, and I know it will never show up anywhere else. He says, that's the testimony of how you grew up being street smart. So in that respect, I learned to recognize the importance of seizing important opportunities. And of course, as you know, Kerry, the ability to keep your mouth shut is a very, very lost commodity these days.
Hey, discretion is the better part of valor, as they say. Hey, I'm sure your brother there, he got paid to keep stuff secret and had to sign a secrecy oath in your position, John. So, hey, integrity. So that's something that we've kind of de-emphasized, if you will. We teach legal ethics in school, but we don't teach integrity as integral to the practice of law. Could you be where you were without that integrity, John?
Probably not. We actually grew up in the same places, and which I learned inside of law was the concept we have actually named it of being the stand-up guy. Stand-up guy doesn't squeal out friends or family, and this is where it is a critical factor. Even people you don't want and you don't particularly love, you don't squeal them out, because you find out what basically happens in the modern world is someone somewhere will do the same to you. Mm-hmm. That's where you've been basically saying you have a follow through. You're a stand-up guy for your own class, so as to speak, and that's just what you basically have.
Mm-hmm. All right. So integrity is prime. Having an opportunity mindset.
Yes.
I'll never forget when a family was in the legal printing business. We had this huge appeal we printed for a guy in New Jersey, and he turned out to be a mobster, but he had made his fortune having contracts with the racetracks to haul away their manure. And basically, the U.S. attorney said, either pay us $2 million today or you're all going off to jail. Evidently, the manure business back then was even more profitable than it is today. And they wrote him a check for $2 million and they stayed free. But who would think there was an opportunity in horse manure? But they saw it.
Well, Kerry, if you talk to a tomato farmer, there's a lot of opportunity in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And hey, so one thing, like, you ever watch that guy, Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs?
Yeah.
Like, look, hey, a person today, beginning welder, can make $80,000, $90,000 a year. Go work on the assembly lines, putting together automobiles. You can make six figures. But nobody wants to do these jobs anymore. When did we get too good to do these dirty jobs? The
importance here too is that the dirty jobs can teach you probably more about human nature, about dealing with difficult people, about looking at opportunities than probably these more pristine jobs that you'll find inside the Wall Street firms. I mean, John and I, during our upbringing in high school and also in college, we worked in the parks department. I mean, John and I were spearing garbage on Fort Hamilton Parkway for years. And we worked with these really like hardworking guys that had families. And, Kerry, the things that they imparted to us, which was the hard work ethic and nothing is beneath you. I think that's the important thing to look at here is that, dirty jobs, I hate to say this, will teach you more about life and about being successful than even the cleaner jobs. And I think in that respect, John and I love that opportunity. I mean, it was 100-degree weather. We'd be out in the sun in Fort Hamilton Parkway. We'd be, literally spearing garbage. But I said, well, what it taught me, Kerry, and I think John the same, one thing's for sure, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I'm going to make sure I stay in school and make sure I stay on point, And
I think the strange thing about the modern world, the world is as you've seen, is people don't really want to work. I've been hearing more and more people say, listen, I'll get by, everything will be fine. And they basically don't want to work. It is a filthy word. It is definitely a filthy word. And the oddball thing about that is actually all work gets you ready for something else. Whether you're a lawyer, you're in the medical field, or even doing what you are doing, you learn something along the ways. As you've been saying.
Hey, I've never cursed on this program yet in 12 years, but somebody wrote a book about, let's just call it crappy jobs. Those are like the most important jobs because you get them when you're in your formative years, and you learn that you have to get to work on time, right? That you have to actually do the work that's assigned to you, that you probably are going to be expected to be respectful, little thing like that. You learn all these values, but yet it's a minimum wage job that pays nothing, that's really not fun a lot of times. But so many of these jobs have disappeared and so many of these people won't do them. Like I had a friend who was a maid, in a hotel, and she basically cleaned up hotel rooms to work her way through college. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually good.
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Osino Resources is a Ross Beatty-backed gold exploration company in mining-friendly Namibia. Osino's district-scale land package is situated near 2 producing gold mines, one of which Osino's management team previously developed and sold to B2 Gold. Osino's founders and management are experienced mining professionals who have already successfully developed and sold 2 companies in the past 7 years. Osino has an excellent shareholder base with Ross Beatty owning 20%, insiders 5%, and Resource Capital Funds 8%. This is an exploration company with drills turning that you'll definitely want to pay attention to. Osino trades in New York under the ticker OSIIF and in Toronto under the ticker OSI. To learn more, go to osinoresources.com. That's osinoresources.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Kerry, John and I got promoted. We got promoted from stabbing garbage to then working and installing horseshoe pits. Remember the horseshoe?
Oh, sure.
So we got promoted to installing like horseshoe pits. And then, of course, John got even promoted one more. John was actually promoted to the bench detail. That was responsible for putting the 1x3 wood, bench plaques inside. So I think what you're trying to say is that in a crazy type of a way, there was a sequence here or a hierarchy of being able to be trusted, respected, and of course, showing, as you had mentioned earlier, the fact that these jobs, these quote unquote meaningless jobs that people will call today, show you more about work ethic, punctuality, responsibility, respect for other people, respect for people you like, but equally important, respectful of people you absolutely cannot stand. I mean, I think in that respect, that's one of the beautiful things about it.
I love it.
It's just
we're talking values. Really, we're talking values, and the fundamental misunderstanding of perhaps of the most recent generations is the importance of values, that karma is a bitch and will eventually do you in. So, whatever you do, you're going to pay the price for it, right?
Absolutely.
No question about that.
I know Ron and I worked in some of the poorest neighborhoods and among races and ethnic groups we ordinarily would not be even meeting. And we learned, everyone learns something. Everyone is basically a street smart person if they use it. And I think that is part of the focus of this book. A lot of the people involved in this book are from all types of race and ethnic groups, mostly middle to working class. And you learn so much just by reading.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, Kerry, one of the pride things that John and I did was we wrote a very very well received book on probably the most iconic mystical American ever, Joe DiMaggio. And the constant question that we would be asked is, how did you ever get close to this guy?
I was going to ask you that.
where you would have dinner with him 6 nights a week, or breakfast 5. And I said the reason why is because, we were street smart kids, which means there were things that Joe recognized that were important to him. Growing up, as you know, in Martinez, California, he grew up extremely poor. He came from a fishing family. I mean, one of the reasons why people don't appreciate why he developed that famous heel spur injury that almost killed his career was because they were so poor. They would wear hand-me-down shoes. And, Joe and I would talk about the same thing. Johnny and I would wear hand-me-down clothes all the time. Family members would give us their pants or their shoes. And so we got that. And of course, what Joe loved was the fact that we could keep our mouth shut better than anybody around. And that was his biggest thing, because people were always trying to get information from Joe about Marilyn Monroe, about Sinatra, about the Kennedys. And look, and Kerry always kept our mouth like this, never had a word. And Joe was really funny, because what he would do is he would try to test us initially. Joe's theory was this, Kerry, you probably would get a kick out of this. Joe says, I start everybody else in the negative column, which means someone has to prove to me to get to ground zero that they're worth anything. And then from there, of course, you move it on.
And, that's what we would call healthy skepticism now. Without the street smarts, it's not just making it much more difficult for you to succeed. It's making you much more difficult to be a critical thinker, to not get taken in regardless what. And we could talk about all the various conspiracy theories that have turned out not to be conspiracy theories. You can't really be a valuable citizen and a involved citizen unless you got those street smarts, right?
Well, look, again, you and I come from the same era, and I'm sure you see the same things that we do. That there's definitely a hole in the curriculum today that we feel will become very, very detrimental in the next 10 to 15 years, because people will not know, as you had mentioned earlier, Kerry, how to problem solve. Like, well, okay, my flat tire, how do I change my flat tire? Well, let me see. I can go to, YouTube and find out. But look, the bottom line is that, we grew up learning how to change flat tires, how to get out of trouble. I mean, how to stay away from trouble.
How to stay out of trouble is even more important, right?
Exactly. And I think that was the other reason why we were excited about doing Street Smart, because we felt that this was a different type of an education that unfortunately we do not find in university curriculum these days. And the interesting thing is that, look, some of the people, Kerry, that we were able to speak with, Dr. Tony Fauci, Ariana Huffington, Bob Costas, Judy Rodin, Tony James, Governor Phil Murphy, Governor David Patterson, Michael Imperioli. The list goes on and on, Jerry Della Femina, and they all, like John said, they all had the similar, foundation. And someone says, well, how did you choose the people that you interviewed for the book? I said, well, honestly, I said, I got a group of people who I know would never, ever, ever want to sit down and have dinner with one another. So that was the premise.
I love it.
But, even though they're different political orientations or whatever, they all had that similar baseline, don't ever give up. Ariana Huffington, when she was starting the Huffington Post, she must have been told, she told me 30 or 40 times, no, it's not a good idea. Bob Costas, same thing. He speaks about how his father had a gambling problem and how he turned the gambling problem into a career, which was completely legitimate, right? And Phil Murphy, being a big guy on Wall Street, turned out to be, a person that was extremely effective in the political arena. So you look at all of these people, they all have something to say. And of course, Johnny and I love Tony Fauci because we used to go to his mother and father's pharmacy store, the Fauci Pharmacy, which was in Brooklyn.
Really? Wow.
And Tony had the same thing to tell us, that look, hey, we grew up in a very privileged environment, as did you, Kerry, and I think that's what we're talking about here. But we need to be able to share this experience with people who are really legitimately, on the right track to learning how to be consummate professionals and citizens.
Hey, and I think to just sum it up, never be afraid to fail, right? As long as you've done your best that you possibly can, never fear failure, because just because you fail doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a person who's getting an education, you're learning, and don't be afraid of adversity. Life is a roller coaster, and we all go through things. Here I am. I feel like I'm talking like my grandparents, but
No, but look,
we all go through it, right?
look, I mean, we all have our own adversities, our own problems that we have. And, someone said recently, well, what makes this so special? I said, well, if you were given the choice, Rock and John, of being in a foxhole with someone who has a sterling record where they never lost, or someone who's been beaten up a few times, which one of the two would you want to be in the foxhole with? Well, undoubtedly, Kerry,
Yes.
I want to be with the person that knows failure, because there's something about failure that helps to fortify us, makes us more intelligent. And look, we've seen this all the time when people have these flawless records. Once something happens, they fall apart. They fall to shreds because they used to call it in boxing the glass jaw. Like, let's find the glass jaw, see if this boxer could take a hit,
Yes. Hey, well, I'm just one of my favorite quotes, and I'm a quote collector in life, throughout life. Oscar Wilde, everything worth learning or anything worth learning can't be taught. And that's what I think our successive generations haven't really learned, and it's to their detriment. Hey, gentlemen, really appreciate it. And hey, the book is, it's a Simon & Schuster book, so it's a real book. And it's on Amazon and wherever fine books used to be sold. Hey, really appreciate you guys coming on. And if you got a question for either John or Rocky, just send me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. Again, the book is Street Smart, the Primer for Success in the New World, and I would add in the new economy. And don't forget, the show notes will be there. You can click, get right through to Amazon, buy the book. And while you're there, sign up for your free newsletter. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. I'm really thrilled that you're my first interview of 2023. Got to get used to saying that. I wish you all the best. And I really couldn't have enjoyed better guests for my first one of the year. Thank you so much.
Okay. Kerry, as we say back in the old streets, you got it. You got it. You got the right stuff, my friend. And we appreciate you taking the time to speak with both of us. And we wish you only health and happiness for the new year, you and your family.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.